The history of external colonization of Africa can be divided into three stages: classical antiquity, Arab conquest, and European colonialism. In popular parlance, colonialism in Africa refers to the latter of these three waves. In nearly all African countries today, the language used in government and media is a relic inherited from one of these waves of colonization. The existence of a vast African diaspora is partly a legacy of the practice of transporting millions of African slaves out of the continent by these external colonizers. Chronological overview. In ancient times, peoples from southern Europe and Western Asia colonized North Africa, while peoples from Southeast Asia colonized Madagascar. In the Middle Ages, North and East Africa was further colonized by peoples from Western Asia. In the modern era, Western Europeans colonized all parts of the continent, culminating in the scramble for Africa in the late 19th century. A wave of decolonization followed after World War II. The main instance of internal colonization within the African continent was the Bantu migration. Ancient and medieval colonization. North Africa experienced colonization from Europe and Western Asia in the early historical period, particularly Greeks and Phoenicians. Under Egypt's pharaoh Amasis, a Greek mercantile colony was established at Naucratis, some 50 miles from the later Alexandria. Greeks also colonized Cyrenaica around the same time. There was also an attempt in 513 BC to establish a Greek colony between Cyrene and Carthage, which resulted in the combined local and Carthaginian expulsion 2 years later of the Greek colonists. Alexander the Great founded Alexandria during his conquest of Egypt. This became one of the major cities of Hellenistic and Roman times, a trading and cultural center as well as a military headquarters and communications hub. Phoenicians established a number of colonies along the coast of North Africa. Some of these were founded relatively early. Utica, for example, was founded c. 1100 BC. Carthage, which means new city, has a traditional foundation date of 801 BC. It was established in what is now Tunisia and became a major power in the Mediterranean by the 4th century BC. The Carthaginians themselves sent out expeditions to explore and establish colonies along Africa's Atlantic coast. A surviving account of such is that of Hanno, which Harden, who quotes it, places at c. 425 BC. Carthage encountered and struggled with the Romans. After the third and final war between them, the Third Punic War, Rome completely destroyed Carthage. Scullard mentions plans by such as Gaius Gracchus in the late 2nd century BC, Julius Caesar and Augustus in the mid and late 1st century BC to establish a new Roman colony near the same site. This was established and under Augustus served as the capital city of the Roman province of Africa. Gothic Vandals briefly established a kingdom there in the 5th century, which shortly thereafter fell to the Romans again, this time the Byzantines. The whole of Roman Byzantine North Africa eventually fell to the Arabs in the 7th century. Arabs introduced the Arabic language and Islam in the early medieval period, while the Malay people introduced varieties of their language to Madagascar even earlier. Early modern period. From the 7th century, Arab merchants established settlements on the Swahili coast, including the island of Zanzibar. Although trans-Saharan trade led to a small number of West African cities developing Arab quarters, these were not intended as colonies, and while Morocco attempted to conquer areas of the Sahel in the Moroccan War, it was soon forced to withdraw its troops after pillaging the area. Early European expeditions concentrated on colonizing previously uninhabited islands such as the Cape Verde Islands and Sao Paulo Toma Copyright Island, or establishing coastal forts as a base for trade. These forts often developed areas of influence along coastal strips, but, with the exception of the Senegal River, the vast interior of Africa was not colonized and was little known to Europeans until the late 19th century. Vincent Capoya mentions Ali Mazroui's three interrelated broad reasons for European exploration of Africa: to increase knowledge, to spread Christianity and to increase national esteem. Capoya continues with a listing of reasons for colonialism. Scramble for Africa. Established empires, notably Britain, Portugal and France, had already claimed for themselves vast areas of Africa and Asia, and emerging imperial powers like Italy and Germany had done likewise on a smaller scale. With the dismissal of the aging Chancellor Bismarck by Kaiser Wilhelm II, the relatively orderly colonization became a frantic scramble. The 1885 Berlin Conference, initiated by Bismarck to establish international guidelines for the acquisition of African territory, formalized this new imperialism. Between the Franco-Prussian War and the Great War, Europe added almost 9 million square miles euro 1/5 of the land area of the globe euro to its overseas colonial possessions. Vincent Capoya notes the great self-esteem some European states felt at possessing territory many times larger than themselves. He adds the significant contribution made by Africans to struggle among the great powers. He states that 1 million people of African descent fought for the Allies in World War I and 2 million in World War II. Capoya considers the colonizers' administrative styles. The French, the Portuguese, the Germans and the Belgians exercised a highly centralized type of administration called direct rule. The British sought to rule by identifying local power holders and encouraging or forcing these to administer for the British Empire. This was indirect rule. France ruled from France, appointing chiefs individuals without considering traditional criteria, but rather loyalty to France. France established two large colonial federations in Africa, French West Africa and French Equatorial Africa. France appointed officials, passed laws and had to approve any measures passed by colonial assemblies. Local groups in German East Africa resisted German enforced labor and taxation. The Germans were almost driven out of the area in 1888. A decade later the colony seemed conquered, though it had been a long drawn-out struggle and inland administration centers were in reality little more than a series of small military fortresses. In 1905, the Germans were astonished by a widely supported uprising. This resistance was at first successful. However, within a year, the insurgency was suppressed by reinforcing troops armed with machine guns. German attempts to seize control in southwest Africa also produced ardent resistance which was very forcefully put down. King Leopold II of Belgium called his vast private colony the Congo Free State. Effectively this meant those exploiting the area were free of all restraint and answerable only to the Belgian king. The treatment of the Africans under this system was harsh enough to cause the other colonial powers to plead with the Belgian king to exercise some moderating influence. Eventually the Belgian government annexed the territory as a Belgian colony. Capoya notes the significant attention colonial powers paid to the economics of colonization. This included acquisition of land, often in forced labor, introduction of cash crops, sometimes even to the neglect of food crops, changing inter-African trading patterns of pre-colonial times, introduction of laborers from India, etc. and the continuation of Africa as a source of raw materials for European industry. Colonial powers also focused on abolishing slavery, developing infrastructure and improving health and education. Decolonization. Vincent Capoya notes the significant resistance imperialist powers faced to their domination in Africa. Technical superiority enabled conquest and control. Pro-independence. The Africans recognized the value of European education in dealing with Europeans in Africa. Some Africans established their own churches. Africans also noticed the unequal evidences of gratitude they received for their efforts to support imperialist countries during the World Wars. Vincent Capoya notes that while European-imposed borders did not correspond to traditional territories, such new territories provided entities to focus efforts by movements for increased political voice up to independence. Among local groups so concerned were professionals such as lawyers and doctors, the petite bourgeoisie, urban workers, cash crop farmers, peasant farmers, etc. Trade unions and other initially non-political associations evolved into political movements. Capoya describes the differences in gaining independence by British and French colonies. Britain sought to follow a process of gradual transfer of power. The French policy of assimilation faced some resentment, especially in North Africa. Shillington describes the granting of independence in March 1956 to Morocco and Tunisia to allow concentration on Algeria, where there was a long and bloody armed struggle to achieve independence. Kapoya writes that when President de Gaulle in 1958 held a referendum in its African colonies on the issue, only Guinea voted for outright independence. Nevertheless, in 1959 France amended the constitution to allow other colonies this option. As Shillington describes, farmers in British East Africa were upset by attempts to take their land and to impose agricultural methods against their wishes and experience. In Tanganyika, Julius Nyerere exerted influence not only among Africans, united by the common Swahili language, but also on some white leaders whose disproportionate voice under a racially weighted constitution was significant. He became leader of an independent Tanganyika in 1961. In Kenya, whites had evicted African tenant farmers in the 1930s. Since the 40s there had been conflict. This intensified in 1952. By 1955 Britain had suppressed the revolt. By 1960 Britain accepted the principle of African majority rule. Kenya became independent 3 years later. Shillington vividly portrays Belgium's initial opposition to independence, the demands by some urban Africans, the 1957 and 1958 local elections meant to calm this dissatisfaction, the general unrest that swept the colony, the rapid granting of independence and the civil strife that ensued. The main period of decolonization in Africa began after World War II. Growing independence movements, indigenous political parties and trade unions coupled with pressure from within the imperialist powers and from the United States ensured the decolonization of the majority of the continent by 1980. While some areas, in particular South Africa, retain a large population of European descent, only the Spanish enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla and the islands of Ra Copyright Union, the Canary Islands and Madeira remain under European control. See also: Economic History of Africa, Neocolonialism, Third World, White African, Notes. References: John Boardman, The Greeks Overseas, Penguin, Harmondsworth, 1973, Michael Crowther, The Story of Nigeria, Faber and Faber, London, 1978, Basil Davidson, The African Past, Penguin, Harmondsworth, 1966, Donald Hartman, The Phoenicians, Penguin, Harmondsworth, 1971, Vincent B. Kapoya, The African Experience, Prentice Hall, Upper Saddle River, New Jersey, 1998, H. H. Scullard, From the Gracchi to Nero, Methuen and Company, London, 1976, Kevin Shillington, History of Africa, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1995, David bin Susan, Iola Copyright Théâtre fois le Maroc, Tar Copyright Moyenagezdu. Parser Copyright Judah Copyright Au Marocain, iUniverse, 2nd edition, 2012, ISBN 978-1-4759-2608-8, ISBN 978-1-4759-2609-5. External links: Economic Impact of Colonialism, Germany refuses to apologize for Hariri Holocaust, a from Africana.com, Belgium exhumes its colonial demons, a from Guardian.co.uk.